Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the show. Today, my special guest is Nicole Visnic. Did I get that right, Nicole?
You were so close. Visnic.
Visnic, there you go.
That S is a Z.
There you go. Excellent. Well, Nicole is a licensed clinical and board certified nutritionist, and she's done a lot of things in her career, working with the vets as well as pioneering psychology within the sphere of her expertise as well. Brings lots to the table, and we're gonna have a great chat today about nutrition and how our pain experience is intimately connected to that, and how can we make progress with our knowledge as well as our practical changes to obtain a better outcome. So, Nicole, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back in time. How did you get to this point of connecting nutrition with pain?
Yes. So around 2010, I started working for a company called Lifespan Medicine, and I'm still there. And at this clinic, we use a proprietary test to determine which foods are genetically most compatible for an individual and which ones are incompatible. The incompatible foods, we recommend that our clients avoid them because they can produce inflammation. And when I first started using this test, and I've used lots of food sensitivity tests in the past, I really didn't know what to expect. But right out of the gate, I started to see some pretty impressive changes in chief complaints. So one of the most memorable clients that I had early on in my career at Lifespan was a man who presented with a lot of pain-based issues. He had had surgery on his knee, had torn his meniscus, still had some pain in his knee, low back pain. He had a torn labrum in his shoulder. And at this point, he wanted to do, what it took to reduce inflammation more naturally. He'd been pretty reliant upon NSAIDs. And so I got him started on a program that included using the results of this test. And it was incredible, the experience. The first thing I remember him reporting about a week after following his plan was that his wife had commented that he stopped snoring. And so I thought, that's interesting. I'm assuming probably his nasal passages were somewhat inflamed and he was having a hard time breathing at night. So that was one thing that quickly improved. And then over the weeks, he started commenting that he wasn't in pain anymore, in particular his knee. And the way he noticed it the most was when he would get out of the car, it was so much easier for him to get out and stand up with ease, as opposed to bracing himself, getting prepared for the process of getting up and dealing with some pain. And by the end of the program, he essentially had reported that he had complete resolution of pain in all of the places he had it in the beginning. And I thought he was unique because normally when people think about nutrition and reducing inflammation or reducing pain, it's adding things to the diet. It's adding specific anti-inflammatory foods or specific supplements. In this case, I didn't use any of those agents. I simply removed the offending foods. And as a result, I believe his inflammation was able to come down to a level where it resulted in actual resolution of pain.
Right, brilliant. Thank you for the illustration, and especially, the one with the liberal tear in the shoulder, because that's one that I am the back of my mind, like, well, can really that pain go away if you change the lifestyle, the nutrition? And
something that's interesting is that I've seen clients as well who have osteoarthritis, where they're actually scheduled for surgery to have a joint replaced, and have had the same kind of improvements where they've canceled surgeries. So we know that there's severe degeneration in the joint, and yet there's a cessation of pain. So we're seeing that the degeneration doesn't always cause the pain response. There are other factors that may be mediating or triggering pain that is not associated with the joint itself.
It's amazing. I think we need to reiterate that. What you said was there are patients who have got surgery scheduled for a replacement, say the knee or the hip. And when they do these changes, they don't need the surgery. Like, that's unbelievable to the medical ear, like, really. And for most patients, that's unbelievable. It's not true, not possible. But I know it's true, not just from a nutritional perspective, but from other approaches that that I utilize and talk to people on the show about. But yeah, so
Yes.
let's dive in. What are some of those basic nutritional or fundamental nutritional factors that switch off inflammation and can postpone surgery and help pain, obviously?
Right. So when I'm evaluating or assessing someone's situation, I'm trying to figure out, what is this person consuming or coming into contact with that is not right for their body, that is pushing them out of balance, or that's actually creating an inflammatory cascade. I'm also thinking, what does this person need more of? And oftentimes I will use laboratory tests to determine that. So if somebody is deficient in vitamin D, or if I see that their omega-3 index is too low, let's say only 6% of the red blood cell has omega-3, EPA, DHA in it, then I'm going to know this person actually is going to benefit from taking fish oil. So I'm always kind of looking at a situation of, what do they need more of and what do they need less of? And every situation is completely different.
Very interesting. So we've got the nutritional factors. Are you checking ferritin as well there?
Oh, yes. We run very, very comprehensive blood work at Lifespan. We just try as the best that we can to leave no stone uncovered. So we definitely look at markers that maybe wouldn't get with a conventional workup. So it's very, very detailed.
Yeah, that's something. Even today, before this podcast, I had a text from a patient, and we was having a discussion around that very issue about which blood test should be done. And we don't have all the like omega-3 ratios that you're talking about. We don't have that here in BC and Canada. Although I've looked into it personally myself in the past. So it's a very interesting, area, I think, of within the pain world. Is vastly underused. And I think you do need to go outside the traditional and order them from companies like yourself to be thorough. And so that's something we'll touch on at the end, just how can people get a hold of your company and how to do that. Okay, so we've got some nutritional factors there. And how does the gut function, the gastrointestinal function, relate to pain?
In a lot of ways. So this is I would say my area of interest, passion, and specialty is helping those who have usually functional gastrointestinal disorders, but sometimes disease like IBD. When someone has a condition, or even at the point when they see me, they might just have symptoms, it hasn't been diagnosed or named in any way, I know that there's going to be some kind of imbalance with their microbiota. So microbiota are the trillions of microorganisms that live on and within your body. And some even say they're running the show and we're just the vehicles for these little bugs. But they do a lot. And in large part, they have the ability to be pro-inflammatory or to be anti-inflammatory. So when that system is out of balance and we have something called dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of these different types of microorganisms, there tends to be a lot of inflammation. So the way I often describe microbiota to my clients is to think about it like a garden, where there's an entire ecology there, and that garden needs certain things. It needs oxygen and sunlight and water and nutrients. But then there are also invaders that can get into that garden and cause chaos. So we don't want a lot of weeds or aphids or gophers coming into our garden. But when that starts to happen, you see that the garden it's destroyed. And so the gut is very much the same way. When you have too many of these invaders, or just even too much bacteria of one particular phyla, it causes discord and it deregulates the way that the gut functions. And so, there's even a connection between specific types of bacteria and specific pain conditions. For instance, ankylosing spondylitis or rheumatoid arthritis. There are pathogens like Klebsiella that if somebody has this, living inside of their GI tract, it can be directly associated with the pain and the condition of some of these autoimmune disorders.
Wow, I haven't heard that before.
Yes.
That's
And I've
interesting.
actually got to see that a couple of times in practice where you clear that pathogen and all of a sudden the symptoms go away. And so
Wow.
for clients, I think it's very difficult to understand that type of connection. Like, how could my digestion have anything to do with pain? But they're intimately connected. And so the way that I think about it is like with diet, if you're eating multiple times per day, you have the potential to be consuming pro-inflammatory foods multiple times per day. So you get all these inflammatory hits. But then with a gut that's kind of inflamed, now you have chronic inflammation around the clock. And so we need to be able to rebalance that microbiota to reduce chronic inflammation. I would say the condition I see the most often is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this is where there starts to be an overgrowth of bacteria in the wrong place, basically in the small intestine as opposed to the colon. When this happens, there are some classic symptoms like gas, bloating, and either constipation or diarrhea, depending on what type of gas is being overproduced. So in the small intestine, you have these bacteria and their food source is carbohydrates. When they chomp down on those carbohydrates, they produce gases like hydrogen, methane, or hydrogen sulfide. Whatever gas is predominant tends to determine whether or not somebody's going to have constipation or diarrhea. So number one, having too much bacteria causes some destruction within the small intestine. There's a degradation of brush border enzymes, which then impedes your ability to properly digest food, and you get maldigestion and some of the metabolic byproducts that cause inflammation. And there's also visceral hypersensitivity. The nerves start to get very, very sensitive. And so this may be localized within the GI tract, or it can be broad and it's a systemic type of inflammation. For instance, there's a specific kind of bacteria, gram-negative bacteria, that release endotoxins, normally lipopolysaccharides. When these are released, these LPS, lipopolysaccharides, cause tremendous inflammation, a lot of damage to tissues. And that is not just isolated to the gut. That can be anywhere. And that's why there's such a strong connection between neuroinflammation and gut inflammation, because these LPS can actually cause inflammation in the brain.
So what's the connection between the gut and the brain then? How does it actually get up north?
Yeah. So there's a lot of connections between the gut and the brain, and the most direct connection is through the vagus nerve. So the nerve that runs from the base of the brain all the way down to the GI tract. And this is why you see if somebody's had a traumatic brain injury, there will often be SIBO, because motility becomes dysregulated when that nerve isn't functioning properly. And then also our gut produces like neurotransmitters. For instance, that's where we make serotonin and dopamine and other chemicals that basically talk back to the brain and can either improve the way that we feel in terms of our well-being and reducing anxiety and overall just creating like a sense of ease. Or if if there's dysfunction in the gut, those neurotransmitters can be out of whack and actually increase symptoms or conditions like anxiety and depression. So there's actually many ways in which the gut and the brain are talking to each other back and forth. And sometimes it's hard to know which came first. Was there some depression or anxiety that caused GI problems or a TBI, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. I think when I first heard that about 95% of our serotonin is produced in the gut, it's like, whoa, that's quite a statement. But yeah, it's
and I was going to say there's something too that most people have experienced. One is experiencing butterflies in your stomach when you feel nervous. So that is very much a brain gut connection where the blood is being in some ways constricted. And then muscles are contracting. So you're actually getting a sensation that's in your stomach that's coming from your brain. Or another thing that anybody who's ever been constipated has experienced, when you're finally able to go to the bathroom, it's the greatest sense of relief. It's like all of a sudden you could feel angry and just mad at the world. And then, you know, a few minutes later, you have rose-colored glasses back on, because it just, there's such a connection between being constipated and toxicity.
Yeah, great example. Yeah, love it. Okay. So you got these patients, you're testing them, you're figuring out metabolic changes that could be corrected. You're explaining to them, you know, this bowel brain connection, this inflammatory marker issue. And what about leaky gut? Does that come into your conversation? Like, is it safe to say everybody's got this at different degrees?
It's very common, and that's
Yeah.
because of the modern world in which we live.
Mm.
So there are many, many insults that can cause a permeable gut lining. Some of those are dietary, even not having necessarily a reaction to food, but even, for instance, spicy food alone has been associated with the development of leaky gut. Of course, not across the board. It might be unique to certain individuals. We know for sure that NSAIDs are a big cause of leaky gut. There's, you know, various types of inflammatory foods that can do this. So there's a number of issues, even just the way that our food supply has changed in some ways with the use of certain types of pesticides and the consumption of those and what those do to our microbiota and then therefore our gut lining. And so when that gut lining becomes permeable, now we start getting substances that are within the GI tract sneaking into the bloodstream where they absolutely do not belong. So if we start to get food antigens into the bloodstream, the immune system goes on high alert. It's thinking, what are these peptides that don't belong here? It must be something we should attack. And the immune system actually forms a response, an inflammatory response against food. And when that actually becomes a lot more serious over time, it can lead to autoimmunity. Because some of the peptides are so similar to the actual tissues in our body. For instance, the peptides that are in gluten are very similar to the peptides that are in your thyroid tissue. And so the immune system can then start to actually attack the thyroid, not just the gluten peptides.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You know, and like women is 8 times commoner than men for thyroid disease, and how common is hypothyroidism? Like, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
So, and it's directly, there must be a direct connection between the gut and the food. And as you mentioned, the gluten peptides that are so like the thyroid peptides.
Sure. And there's also, though, the issue again with modern life and having a high level of stress, because generally as stress goes down, like goes up, then free T3 goes down. And so it's our body's way of just kind of protecting us. It wants to slow down metabolic rate and just kind of keep us safe while we're under an immense amount of stress.
Just for those listening, free T3 is the bioactive form of thyroid or thyroxine. We measure T3, we measure T4 and T3, but it's that bioactive aspect, the part in the blood that's actually doing the job to keep the metabolism where it should be. But so the body's got this inert feedback loop to slow you down, therefore hypothyroidism, low energy, to just protect against the stress. So that doesn't surprise me, because, you know, our body's so intelligent. But I think what you shared today about the similarity in the peptides of gluten and also in the thyroid does surprise me. That's kind of a new piece of information. So thank you for linking that for myself.
Well, something that's interesting to observe clinically is that if you take someone who has Hashimoto's and remove gluten entirely, oftentimes in a relatively short period of time, you'll see the autoantibodies drop, even sometimes back down to 0. So we know for sure that there is some kind of association with food and with the gut lining when you're seeing this increase in autoantibodies.
Okay, well, you've highlighted the thyroid and you've highlighted gluten, but what other foods are you advising your patients to avoid, first of all?
Yes. So if I did no test whatsoever to determine what somebody should or shouldn't be eating, I would often start with about the 5 most common reactive foods. So foods that just in the literature and then that clinically we see tend to produce symptoms. And those are wheat, dairy, soy, corn. There's a couple of others like peanuts, eggs, sometimes tree nuts that can be problematic. And I always advise clients to do it as an experiment and for a defined short period of time. Give me 2 weeks. If there was no benefit whatsoever, we're not going to continue down this track. But most often there's some kind of improvement and sometimes surprisingly so.
And with the corn, that's also the what foods are we eating corn? Not the basic corn from the fields at this time of year, but what other forms does corn make its way into?
Yeah, so corn is very common, ubiquitous. So most people actually aren't eating corn on the cob. They're eating maybe corn tortillas or something that has cornmeal. A lot of processed foods like cereals contain corn. Even various nutrition bars have derivatives of corn. And so it's one of those where you really have to start looking at ingredient lists to start identifying all the hidden sources of these foods.
Exactly. And gluten, there's gluten, and then there's more than gluten though. You can remove gluten, but there's still other grains out there that's inflammatory in nature, something I came across in the last few years. So what other things other than gluten are we looking for?
So the testing that I use is actually based on lectin compatibility. So lectins are proteins that are found in food, and specifically they're in high amounts in certain kinds of foods like grains and beans. And lectins, they're very resistant to digestion and even to heat. So they're tough to break down. What we're looking at is individuals have surface antigens. Sometimes we call them surface receptors. They're also glycoproteins. They're found on the outside of cells. And when you consume lectins, they have the ability to actually bind on to these surface antigens. And when enough lectins start binding and clumping, we get agglutination, which causes inflammation. It can start in the gut, but lectins are also actively endocytosed. So they can be sucked up right through the gut wall and land in the circulation and wind up really on any tissue. And so lectins, again, they can be in some of those. There's the foods that we know are just high in them, but also what we've learned through our testing is that lectins are not universally problematic. They are specific based on the surface antigens on your cells. So there are popular books that completely eliminate all lectins, and it's very difficult to do that. So that's why we actually test to determine which ones are not right for you. And some lectins actually have benefits. So I do like to use some kind of testing to help determine that, because it's frustrating for clients to do a lot of experimentation, to just keep trying to remove these things and then reincorporate them, figure out which is the biggest offender. At least then they have a little bit of a roadmap to be able to have, number one, objectivity, which is important, I think, psychologically. And number two, it doesn't take as long. It's not as messy or complicated.
So if people have got the resources and people have got access to, companies like yourself who test, that's obviously the best way to go. Absolutely. But what for people who don't have that access, and what would you recommend them to do? This is your host, Wayne Phimister. Thanks for enjoying the show today. Today, I'm advertising my Healing Chronic Pain course. Now, it covers the new science of how your brain can heal pain. It covers the heart-brain connection, as well as the gut-brain connection. Also, I dive into inflammation, how you can heal that, and optimize movement as you move towards a new reality in your body. So check it out on the link below. Enjoy the show.
Yeah. So I think that there's actually great programs that are out there. For instance, like Whole30 is, it's a program that's trying to encourage people to eat a whole foods diet. And sometimes that in and of itself ends up being an anti-inflammatory diet,
Mm,
because we are removing adulterated ingredients and food derivatives and
mm,
just, sometimes chemical compounds and also just foods in general that may not be adding as much to health. And they may just be interfering. So I think starting with a whole foods based diet is really smart. And also eating seasonally. Foods just tend to be richer in nutrients when they're in season. They taste a lot better. It's a natural way of rotating your diet and diversifying. And that turns out to be actually extremely important for your microbiota.
mm,
So in general, the more diverse the diet, the more diverse the microbiota and the less inflammation that there will be. The only problem is when you've already developed digestive issues or you have food intolerances. And at that point, what I've observed over the years is that most people keep restricting and restricting until they're eating about 5 to 12 different foods. And while it may sometimes keep symptoms under control, it actually is exacerbating the pre-existing issue. And so in large part, I try to work to help clients gradually increase
mm,
foods that they were not eating before. And
mm,
it has to be done so systematically in very small amounts to
mm,
not cause symptoms.
mm,
But I have been able to do that. And there are ways of improving what's called oral tolerance, or the
mm.
ability to digest food and to for your immune system to not have reactions to that food. So we want to have oral tolerance. When you start to lose that, it causes a lot of problems.
Mhm. I like that idea a lot. I do encourage patients to reintroduce foods again and just to go on this journey with themselves with their different foods so they can have a more variety of choices. And I think if I'm honest myself, I maybe need to do a little bit better
We all
at
do. We
that.
all do.
Yeah, it's never ending, is it? Just the reality of the knowledge with the practical application of the knowledge of what is good for us, right? So,
Well, and I think it's more than that, because I do think of human beings as kind of biopsychosocial creatures. And so we're strongly influenced by our thoughts and by those
mhm,
around us,
mhm,
and additional, inputs from the outside world. And so changing one's diet theoretically is simple, but when you actually start to do it, you realize just how hard it is, because you're changing the way you think, the way that you shop, the way you prepare food, the way that you dine. And I think it's also really difficult for people to feel countercultural if they're living in a house with people who eat a different way, or they have a peer group, or
mhm,
just, those in their lives that eat dramatically different. You feel a little awkward
mhm,
um, trying to do something that's totally different. Oftentimes it leads to a lot of questions that then you have to try to answer, and the spotlight's on you. There's a lot of reasons why it's difficult to make these changes, but also I think we're all very busy, and most people end up becoming kind of creatures of habit. We go to we have our go-to meals, things that are quick or easier than we know we can whip together.
yeah,
And it takes time and thoughtfulness and preparation to be able to do something that's different.
absolutely, absolutely. It's biopsychosocial food. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And I think also, just sitting down and enjoying and family time and connection and all that whole side of it is something we don't often think about, but probably just as important at the end of the day, get
I've
the heart
often said
involved.
that, yes, that truly sometimes how you eat can be more important than what you eat.
Yeah,
I actually wrote it was an article many years ago on communal eating
yeah,
and how that has kind of faded away.
mm,
Most people find themselves eating in front of their computer or their TV, in their car, just rushing and not enjoying the meal, certainly not sharing it with others.
mm,
And the more stress that you are under, so not being in a relaxed state while you're eating, the more potential there is to actually have problems digesting that food. And sometimes it's only, small changes that someone might feel asymptomatic But a lot of times, and I've had this experience where I've eaten so fast, I have hiccups afterwards, or I somehow feel out of balance, like just like I know I did not digest that meal properly because I didn't even chew. I ate my food practically whole.
Yeah, recently I had some esophageal spasm, and it was like I had to just couldn't do anything. It was intensely painful.
Yes.
And it was salad I was eating.
Yeah.
Dry salad wasn't the best, but too fast and doing too many things, talking on the phone and stuff at the same time. But yeah, it's your body certainly will tell you if you're stepping out of line. So, okay, cool. So let's just wrap this up. So can you give us some information about the company that you're working with? And, are you doing services around the country, like online? And is that possible now?
Yes, and in large part, I think the pandemic has changed a lot for telehealth. So we've always worked with clients around the world. And so we have multiple programs, but there is specifically a nutrition program. I'm the director of nutrition, and I have a wonderful colleague, and we kind of run that program together. And we just, when someone comes in, what we're really trying to do is figure out what is the cause of these symptoms. So even if it's not, let's just say GI related, if somebody has high cholesterol, why is their cholesterol high? Is there too much inflammation? Do they have hypothyroid? Is it their diet? There's a lot of different reasons why that could be, but we work really hard to try to think about what is causing this. Or even in a more relevant example to my kind of area of interest with SIBO, why does someone have this? Did they maybe have post-infectious IBS? Did they have a TBI? Have they taken too many antibiotics? Constantly trying to figure out what is the reason why this started in the first place. And there's almost always a reason that you can trace back to. But we tend to think about these issues in terms of there are antecedents that were in place that allowed a cause to take place. And then there are mediators, there are factors in our life that kind of keep the symptoms at bay and not resolute or not resolved. And then there are triggers, things that just flare up the condition. And so we're trying to constantly address all of those things. And so, and we do the testing so that we can get a really good idea of what's going on with somebody on a biochemical level.
And how can people reach you?
Yeah, so at Lifespan, you can go straight to their website, Lifespan Medicine, and you can also find me personally at analyticalnutrition.com.
Well, we'll get those in the links below this show today so people can reach out to you and check you out, see what you've got to offer them in person. So thanks so much. It's been good to see you. Good to
thank you
to meet you and talk about your specialty and how you've developed it, over time, and now have providing a global service for people, because we live in one world, and the pan epidemic has shown us that we can have medicine around the world as well, which is fantastic. So congratulations on everything you're doing. Keep it up. And
thank you. You too.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Doing good work, meaningful work.
Yeah, well, we've got to share the knowledge and do the best we can to the best of our ability, and give back to what we've been taught as well. So, okay, well, thanks so much again, and hope to see you once again.
Thank you.